All right, family. I am trying to adjust my Facebook so that I can see the comments on my live. Hold on 1 second. I think it's like a lag in the broadcast. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully, everything will work out and I will be able to see the comments. So, if you usually tune in to my live broadcast, you know that I usually do them on Monday, the last Monday of each month. But this month, um, it just didn't work out that way. And so I was looking at the calendar because I kind of had a feeling that, hold on, okay. So let's try this again because StreamYard is acting crazy. I don't know. Hold on. Let me make sure that I am good and on Facebook. Okay, yes. So looks like everything is going okay now. So as I stated before, when I wasn't talking to anyone because StreamYard was acting crazy, as it does sometimes. Crystal Denise. I am at Restoration New Direction Culture Center here at 436 Central Avenue in Coldwater, Mississippi. And it is Wednesday. I normally do my live broadcast on the last Monday of each month, but this month, what I had scheduled just didn't pan out. And so Saturday, when I was looking at the calendar, I noticed something and I was like, okay, well, I can just postpone it till Wednesday because I noticed that two of our great ancestors entered the physical realm on this day. So on August 31st, 1935, brother Leroy Eldridge Cleaver entered the physical realm on this day. And um, brother Eldridge was born in Wabaseka, Arkansas. And so I'm from Arkansas. Many of you know that. And Wabaseka is actually right outside of Pine Bluff. It's in Jefferson County, Arkansas. And it's crazy because I had an experience there when I was very young. Well, I wasn't very young. I was maybe around 11 or 12 years old. And my mom and my sister and I were traveling from Montrose to Morrilton, Arkansas to visit my aunt. And right when we were passing through the Alzheimer area, I think it was, the car started having some problems, and my mom had to pull over to the side of the road. And we were sitting there waiting, didn't know what we were going to do, right? Because this was before cell phones were on the scene. So, anyway, um, this brother, he saw us in there, and so he stopped and checked the car and realized that there wasn't anything he could do to fix the car. But what he did was he took us to the principal's home, the principal there in Alzheimer, and he and his wife welcomed us. Didn't know us from Adam, right? Welcomed us into their home and allowed my mom to call my dad, and he came and fixed the car. We went on our way. Said all that to say that that was a time when we were still a village and we still had the community mindset. Of course, we were a little afraid, but we weren't as afraid as we would be in this day and age because if your car, if you have car problems in the middle of nowhere now, you know, that's going to cause you some anxiety and fear. But that was in Wabaseka, Arkansas, and that's where Leroy Eldridge Cleaver was born. But as with most, a lot of blacks, I won't say most, a lot of blacks in the South, he and his family were part of the Great Migration, and they moved out west. They moved to Phoenix first, and then they migrated on to LA. And so it was in LA when he began, you know, to have some problems, and he had several confrontations with the law, and he actually served time in three prisons. And his second stint in prison was when he began writing, and that is what produced the book Soul on Fire and Post Prison Writings and Speeches. So I have both of those in my library, and one day eventually I'm going to get to them. So today we salute Brother Eldridge Cleaver. So about a year later, well, exactly a year later, in 1936, Marva Knight entered the physical realm in Monroeville, Alabama. And tonight we're going to tap into her book, Marva Collins's Way. Now, it was first published in 1982, and it's part biographical and it's part practical. The book is co-authored by Sylvia Tamarkin, and in it they exchange voices. So you'll have Mama Marva speaking in some ways, in a lot of it, and then you'll have Sevilla input or observation as she watches Mama Marva in the classroom. So we're going to be talking about this because when I was looking at the calendar, I was like, I got excited because it was divine synchronicity, right? That allowed that allowed things to not work out, but really work out even better because I'm constantly learning and studying some of our great educators of the past and taking notes on how we can be more effective here at Ashe Academy and how we can be more effective in our career fields, you know, because our great ancestor John Henry Clark said, take what you do best and do it for your people. So we should always be looking to perfect our skill set, perfect what we do, and do it for our people, and especially with our children. So I do have her other book, Ordinary Children, Extraordinary Teachers, but I wanted to um, read this one because I think this one is just more of this with more inspiring words. But I will tell you, I am thoroughly inspired and motivated and pumped and ready to try some of her practical solutions to teaching and educating our children. So on page 203, Mama Marva says, somehow people have a hard time accepting the fact that inner city children can achieve on a higher plane than most schools require. And so she goes on to say, it was precisely that myth that I wanted to shatter. With that in mind, I took on children from the Cabrini Green housing projects in the summer of 1981. And so when I read that, I was instantly reminded of the ancestor that I talked about last month, and that was Fanny Jackson Coppin, who was a teacher in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and she was determined to dispel the myth that Black children cannot learn. And so when I was reading this, there were several things and several passages that reminded me so much of Fanny Jackson Coppin, and how the educational system has been kind of dumbed down to where we are today. But so that was what Mama Marva said, and Sevilla says Cabrini Green is the essence of Chicago's mean streets. A graffiti scrawl sketch of high rise public housing where murder, rape, and gang terror are daily events. In March 1981, Cabrini Green caught a nationwide media attention when Mayor Jane Byrne moved into one of the apartments in an effort to curtail the violence and pacify residents. Trying to keep things cool over the summer, City officials stepped up the police patrols, built a new baseball field to get the children off the streets, and also sponsored a tuition free summertime institute for 140 Cabrini Green area youngsters, kindergarten through sixth grade. Mayor Byrne asked Marva to organize the 8-week summer program. She accepted without hesitation, asking specifically for students who had behavior problems or were reading at least 2 grades below their age level. This time, critics will hardly be able to accuse her of selecting the brightest students. Marva used the same textbooks and teaching materials she used at her school, not the ones the city school system wanted to provide. She set up curriculum, prepared the lesson plans, and hired the teachers. There was one catch. Her staff had to include 5 teachers from the public schools, a concession to the Chicago Teachers Union. More than 2 dozen people applied. Some of the interviews were very brief. One applicant demanded a classroom with windows. Another, was dismayed that the Bird Elementary School, where the program was being held, was not air conditioned. A third wanted to know how many aides she would have. Others balked when Marva told them that they would not be able to sit down behind a desk. Needless to say, those teachers weren't hired. Organizational details were taken care of the day before the program started, much to the irritation of some teachers who didn't want to show up before the children. Marva refused to waste any class time passing out books and papers. By 8:30 on the first morning, Marva and her staff were ready to begin teaching. Marva was also to supervise the 7 classrooms. During the first week, she spent most of the 3-hour daily session with the sixth graders, the older students, and by now chronic non-learners. To see her then was to see the quintessential Marva at work. Preacher, flatterer, aphorist, quipster, booster, parent, and teacher. And then it goes on to explain how the summer program went. And of course, there were challenges, but Marva was totally equipped to face those challenges. And by the end of the session, on the last day, they had a program at the Assembly Hall at Byrd Minor School, and it was crowded, of course, with media and city officials. As Mayor Byrne presided over the award ceremony, passing out certificates of achievement to 87 students. And so after the press was there, they interviewed several of the students, and they were told them that they learned about Norse and Greek gods, and they learned about Shakespeare and Macbeth, and then that they were going to take some of what they learned back to school when they went back to school. So the program was effective. And so I wanted to share that because now I'm going to backtrack into how she got there. How did she get to where she was effective in one of the toughest housing projects in Chicago? So Marva Collins, as I said previously, she was born into the physical realm on this day in 1936 as Marva Knight. Her father, Henry Knight, was a successful businessman, and her mother, Bessie, took care of the house in what Marva said fastidiously, meaning that she was on her everything had to be perfect, right? So Marva describes her relationship with her father early in the book on page 32 and 33. She says she believed that her father was the greatest man who ever lived. These are her words. I would never meet anyone I admired more. He was the moving force in my life, and we had a very special relationship. Of course, I loved my mother, but we weren't as close. My mother was very prim and proper, not as free with the hugs and kisses as my dad. She showed her love and concern for me by making sure I ate the right foods and wore the right clothes. I knew she loved me, but I miss hearing her tell me that she did. As an adult, I have come to understand how important it is to be openly affectionate with a child, to be sensitive to a child's feelings. I couldn't talk things over with my mother, which is especially frustrating since I was the only child in the family until I was 14 and always needed someone to talk to. My father was always there. I could say anything to him, even if it was silly, and he would patiently listen. I never felt I had to prove anything to him. I always knew where I stood, but I could never quite please my mother. I was not as ladylike or well behaved or as pretty as she wanted me to be. Parents don't realize how they can nag and pick away at a child until there is nothing left to pick. My dad was always supportive, constantly telling me how smart and pretty and special I was, even when I wasn't. So I felt good about myself. However, I did become an overachiever, and I attribute that to my mother saying I would never come to any good. Whew. She goes on to say, my father had only had a fourth grade education, but he was the smartest person I ever knew. He was a risk taker with an instinct for business. Taking over his father's grocery store, he parlayed the assets into a 1,000-acre cattle ranch and a town funeral parlor. He was a clever businessman, and even when he didn't have enough collateral, he somehow convinced people to go along with him on faith. When products were scarce on every grocery shelf during the Second World War, my father made a deal with an A&P in Florida that could buy goods in larger quantities. He was the only merchant in Alabama, black or white, who had steaks, nylon stockings, chocolate, and chewing gum for his customers. And then she would go on to talk about how the community respected him, white and black. And, he was a powerful man. And so that's what people respect, right? Power. And that's what we talk about here in restoration is building power. But I want to go back to her because her family divorced when she was 12, and she and her mother would move to Atmore, Alabama. And that's where she continued her segregated education, who many thought was inferior. But when you realize the foundation that is set for many of our ancestors and elders, you realize that less is more sometimes. When you can control the culture and the learning experience for children, it actually is more. So she would reflect on her school experience when she would go when she first entered the classroom, and she shared her experience of two teachers um, in the book. And on page 42, she says, along with the other Black children in Monroeville, I spent the primary grades at Bethlehem Academy, a clapboard building with unpainted walls and a wood burning stove in each room. There were two grades to a classroom. Books were in short supply, and most of our teachers had only a 10th grade education themselves. Out of all the teachers at Bethlehem, two left a strong impression. I got off to a bad start with my first teacher, a heavy-set woman who often wore a blue dress patterned with red, green, and yellow alphabet letters. In the first week of school, when we were learning Arabic numbers, I kept making the numeral 2 backwards. Each time I drew it wrong, the teacher rapped my fingers with a ruler. I never understood why she kept hitting me. If I had known how to do it right, I would have. She acted as though I made the mistake deliberately. I never forgot that experience. It has influenced the teaching methods I use with my students. To me, an error means a child needs help, not a reprimand or ridicule for doing it wrong. No child should ever be told that's stupid or you can't do it or you don't know what you're doing. Adults should take a positive approach with children. The most important thing we can do as parents and teachers is to build a child's self-confidence. Any child can learn that he or she, any child can learn if he or she has not already been taught too thoroughly that learning is impossible. And so she went on to talk about Mrs. McGance. Mrs. McGance was a patient, good teacher. She had her students work at the blackboard so that she could correct mistakes as quickly as they were made. Children need immediate feedback, especially in math and language, where they need to master one skill before they can go on to the next. I do not wait days before returning papers. Errors will mean nothing to a child several days later when the class has moved on to something new. Delay in correcting errors only makes the child fall behind. And when I read that, it reminded me a lot of Mama Fannie Jackson Coppin because she wrote the same thing. She was a firm believer in having children go to the blackboard to work on problems because not only are they helping themselves, they're probably helping someone else in the classroom as well. And I really like the idea of correcting mistakes when they are made. So I really appreciated that. So after Mama Marva graduated from Escambia County Training School, she went on to Clark College, which is now Clark Atlanta, the HBCU in Atlanta, Georgia, and she majored in secretarial science. Interesting major, isn't it? Secretarial science. So she went back to Monroeville, and of course, none of the white businesses there would hire her. And her dad, he was supportive of everything she did. So she worked with him for a little while, but then she thought about teaching. And so she taught at the Monroe County Training School for 2 years. And it was here where she developed and realized that this was her passion, mission, and purpose. And so she was new and she did not have any background in education. And she stated that that was probably to her benefit because she wasn't trained to look for certain characteristics. And, she wasn't trained in the methodology of education. She just went in there dedicated to ensure that her students will learn. So she wasn't looking for, well, this student is this type of learner and this student is that type of learner kind of barrier that would hinder her from being as effective as she could in the classroom. But what she did, she observed her students, of course, and she asked more seasoned and experienced teachers for guidelines and helps and tips. And then the principal was very supportive of her as well. So that helped her grow in her effectiveness in teaching. But after 2 years, she decided that she didn't want to do that anymore. She wanted to, move on and explore her options. And then after being in Atlanta for 4 years of college, coming back to Monroeville was like, okay, this town is kind of slow now. I don't have the excitement of college. So in 1959, she moved to Chicago and she got a job as a medical secretary at Mount Sinai Hospital. And she taught herself Latin so that she could learn and understand the medical terminology. I'm always inspired and encouraged by people who teach themselves another language, who teach themselves how to have a certain skill set. I know people who have taught themselves how to play chess. That's always inspiring and encouraging to me. So she worked there for some time, and then she also met the man who would become her husband, Clarence Collins. So they married, and they bought a house in a neighborhood in Chicago that is called Garland Park. And so when they first moved to Garland Park, it was a family type community. And as usual, Paul Anderson is the master of pattern analysis. He says, the more Black families move in, you begin to experience the neighborhoods begin to experience white flight. And so this is what happened. Um, Mama Marva and her husband Clarence decided that they weren't going to move. They were going to stay in Garland Park. And what was so frustrating to her was our loss of community. Even then, in the late 70s, we were beginning to lose it because we were assimilating more. And not even a love and belief and a desire to keep our neighborhoods up and believe in ourselves that we could prosper and have prosperous communities and neighborhoods with just us. And that was frustrating and disheartening to her, but she did what she could do to keep her community and neighborhood in intact. So she began teaching again. She said she started missing the classroom, and so she filled out an application to teach, and she was hired as a full-time basis substitute because she was not certified. And I thought that was really interesting, which basically meant that she did not have any seniority and she had to teach wherever they put her. And so she did that. In her first year, she talks about her experience. She says, never having taught second grade, I didn't know very much about how to teach reading. I didn't know about the debate between advocates of the phonics method, in which children learn to decode vowel and consonant sounds in a word, and the look-say method, in which they identify words with pictures and build a sight vocabulary by reading sentences that use the same word over and over. It seemed to me that the natural thing to do was to teach the children to sound out words. That's how I had learned to read, so that is what I taught my second graders. I disregarded the teaching guide, which followed the look-say method. And when you read this book, I'm not going to um, go over everything she did, but you learn how she was effective because she used everything uh, as a learning experience. She would say, I wanted them to understand that reading is not an exercise in memorizing words, but a way to bring ideas to light. And so, um, what she did was she always started her sessions with phonics, and they would build on sounds because she said if the children could get the basic sounds down, they could read anything. And she exposed them at early ages to a variety of literature, what we would consider classics now in the traditional school system. And remember this was the late 70s, and so what I found kind of frustrating was her dependence on white text, on European text. And I know sometimes that we do things out of ignorance because we just don't know, right? This time, we just, this time, during this time, she might not have known. Even going to HBCU, she wasn't exposed to a wide range of Black authors because even she states that um, her exposure to even these classics and these different authors, diverse authors of European authors, was something that she had to discover on her own. So, I often say, take what you can use it, and then, just learn from the mistakes and learn from the past errors. I wouldn't even say mistakes, just learn to do better. So she used all kind of texts to encourage her students to read, and she defined everything. Even in her math classes, when they were adding numbers, she would say, what are the two numbers we add together? They are atoms, and what addends, and what are we getting? We're getting a sum, because she said that the word sum is used on every standardized test. And that is a real problem because a lot of our children don't do well on the standardized test because they don't understand the language. And so that is another reason why reading is so important. And she did great jobs of breaking down words, the sounds, um, even the pronunciations of different types of letters and how they would be pronounced in different spellings and contexts. So she said teaching phonics takes time and patience. And now, even then she was seeing that disappearing from the school system. But she was determined to keep it in her delivery and her teaching because it was the most effective. And she also said this quote that I shared when I planned the broadcast was, we have to ensure that our children are reading interesting books, something that will make them want to read, make them continue their reading journey. Because if you can read, like I said, science says, if you can read, you can learn anything. Reading opens the doors to so many opportunities. So she taught it. Forgot the first school she taught it, but then she took a break because she did have four children. And then she went back into the school system and she would go to Delaney Elementary. And this is where she spent most of her time teaching before she started doing her own thing. And at this time, her children, her two oldest, she had two sons, they were in school. And it's crazy because we find this a lot today, that teachers who are in the public school system, their children go to private or parochial schools because they know the condition of the public school system. So her children, her two oldest boys, were in private schools. But even then, she had a problem with the instruction in a private school because she felt that they weren't being challenged enough. she felt that, these are Black boys, so they weren't getting the attention. And she was very, very aggressive in the classroom, and she was very aware and knowledgeable of what needed to be taught and how it needed to be taught. And so she was moving her children around in the public and parochial schools throughout the city of Chicago as well. So I thought that was really, really interesting. And it still happens today because we see that a lot today. Um, yeah. So when she was in Delaney, she began, being effective, and she noticed that she would get the difficult children. She would get the children that were way behind on their reading. She would get the children that had basically given up on going to school. I mean, if when you read the book, I'm not gonna say if, I'm gonna say when you read the book, especially those who are in education, you're going to be in awe of how she turned students around. I mean, just turned them around just by giving them the attention that they deserve. On page 59, she said, I never thought I'd look back to the 1860s with awe. I came across a rhetorical reader published in 1862 that included works by John Ruskin, Oliver Goldsmith, John Milton, and Leo Tolstoy. It was intended for children in elementary school. Today, these classical works are considered too difficult, even though vocabulary in the first grade readers has been reduced. A first grade reader from 1920 introduced 345 new words. Today, one of the most popular first grade readers introduces only 53 words for the entire year. Yet, a child starting school at the age of 5 already has a vocabulary of about 4,000 words. So what she's saying is that she's seen a dumbing down of curriculum. And if you were tuned in last month when I was speaking about Jackson Coppin, I said the same thing, just based on the book Reminiscence of School Life and her curriculum, where she had broken down subjects and had explained how to teach English and language arts, how to teach math, how to teach science, how to teach geography, and just looking at the lesson plans that they were creating in the late 1800s, early 1900s, as Marva Collins stated, they are continuously dumbing down the curriculum. Our children have the capability to learn. We just have to set the standard higher. And that is what was so inspiring to me as I read, because I'm constantly thinking about how we can be more effective here at Ashe Academy, how we can be more effective in equipping our children. And I love that she always referred to her students as children. I don't like the word kids. Children to me sounds more humane than kids. So I love the word children, and she uses that word a lot in this book. So her whole premise is to teach phonics and to teach a love of reading and to infuse math and reading in everything you do. She uses fables and fairy tales to teach life lessons. And now that we know better and we have access to more resources, we can use African folk tales like The People Could Fly to do the same thing. So we had to be creative, use our Kaumba creativity to reach our students. And we have to use our Kujichagulia self-determination to define what it is that we need our children to know. And we have to be instrumental in equipping them. So she had success stories at Delano, but because she was on her square, there was a community brewing that hated her. The other educators, the other teachers did not like her. And they were creating a very tough culture for her. She said that, when she would walk into the teacher's lounge, everybody would be quiet. And there were times when she heard other teachers say, I hate these damn kids. She said she heard that more than once. I hate these damn kids. How in the world? How in the world can you be an effective teacher? How in the world can you even go in the classroom every day if you already have that kind of attitude and you bring that kind of energy? Trust me, the children know, and it shows up in their behavior. And and we don't get that. And so another thing that I gleaned from this book was she was always walking. She never sat behind her desk to deliver lessons. She never sat behind her desk to deliver instruction. When she was teaching, she walked among the students, and as they were working, she would correct them right then. And she would say, okay, you're doing a good job. And she would touch them and she would show them display. She was very affectionate with her students. She was always complimenting her students. Even when they displayed negative behavior, she would come right back with something else. But she never sat down, and that was one of her criteria when she hired you to work in her school. Was she wanted you to know you are not going to sit behind a desk and talk to these children. If they're sitting in this down on the floor, you're gonna get down there and you're gonna speak to them on their terms and at their level. So I thought that I think that that's admirable, and it is something that I'm going to take with me. But when you read through and there was this one uh, little girl that came through, and she had been tested and she had been labeled, and she knew she had been labeled. So she thought that this behavior that she was displaying was appropriate. She would say that the her mother was actually a teacher too, but the little girl would come in the classroom with walking on the back of her shoes and just runny nose and chewing on her ribbons, and sometimes she would take her socks off and chew on them, just displaying this really defiant negative behavior. And so she would act like she couldn't do the work. Even though she wasn't in the classroom, she wouldn't do the work. So one day, Miss Marva, she got really frustrated with her and she said, if you don't do this work, I'm gonna kill you. And she was like, oh my goodness, it was out before I even thought about what I said. And all the other students were like, buck-eyed and looking and everything. And but the little girl, she started reciting everything that was asked of her. We don't want to go to that extreme, but we do want to get it out of them because a lot of times it is in them, and they're just being defiant and behaving as they're expected to behave. Because a lot of times the school systems have tested these children, they have labeled them and everything else. And with that, there's a passage on page 111 where she says, we live in a label conscious society where people are forever trying to categorize and classify each other. We tend to overuse terms like learning disability, developmental disabilities, behavior disorder, and hyperactive, bandying them about until they are stretched beyond validity. A child who pitches in his seat isn't necessarily hyperactive. Maybe the child is bored. Maybe that child doesn't know how to do the work and is afraid to ask for help. Or maybe that child is just active. So, that leads us to where we are now. And this was written in 1982. So these observations were taking place in the late 1970s. And so I think, there is some validity. There are some children who do have, disability. I don't like the word deficiencies or differences that we should notice and address. But I do think that these labels are used excessively and used too quickly. And a lot of times the children know that they're being labeled, and so they quote act accordingly. She stresses that the teacher sets the tone for the classroom. The teacher is actually teaching the other students how to treat each other. So in her classroom, the students always praise other students' success. So imagine if you had a classroom and the child is reading and they finish reading the sentence, and you know that they're making progress and the entire classroom explodes into applause. What would happen? How would that set the tone for learning in the classroom? So I was just so inspired and so impressed. Um, So after she left Delano, she was approached by some parents in the community who wanted to start a learning cooperative. And she was right on it. They wanted her to be the director of the school, and they wanted her to be the curriculum, write the curriculum for the school. So the West Side, it wasn't West Side Preparatory. It was, I can't remember the title, the name of the school, but the first, the preceding to her actual school was in a community college, in the basement of a community college. The president or director, dean of the college let them have the space there at the community college in the basement, and she had her classroom. When she first started, she maybe had 5 students, but as word spread about how effective she was, her classroom began to grow. So she taught there for a few years, I think maybe 4 or 5 years, and she decided that she had had enough of the politics of trying to work out of a community college. And she decided, hey, I'm just going to use the upstairs of my house for my school. And she changed the name to Westside Prepar- Preparatory School. Yeah, I have you have a problem. Preparatory School. And so the when she first started, the school was upstairs in her home. Her husband did all the renovations to make it adaptable and make it work to be a classroom. So when she opened her doors, she had 5 students, and one of them was her daughter, Cindy. And mind you, these children ranged in age and ability. They ranged in age and ability. It's just like during right at when our ancestors were in the one room schoolhouses, right? It was just like when she was in primary school where there were 2 grades to a classroom. So um a lot of times you depended on your older students to help with the younger students. But anyway, so she had these 5 different personalities, reading levels, uh math, all that, and she catered to each one of them. And the way she did that was what I said earlier. She never sat behind her desk. She was always up, engaged with the students, walking around, assessing what they were doing, correcting them right there on the spot so they could move on, and build upon what they were already learning. So word spread very quickly about what she was doing, and a reporter, I think it was from Time Magazine, came and did a piece on her. And that is when she like kind of exploded, right? That's when we had the movie about her, the Marva Collins story with Cicely Tyson playing Marva Collins. That's when you had the 60 Minutes, as she was on 60 Minutes, and that's when she really began to grow and expand. She was receiving a lot of monetary donations that allowed her to grow even further, hire some more teachers to help her. And when she hired someone, she trained them thoroughly in what it is that they needed to do to be just as effective as she was. And even the young girl that I was talking about earlier, there was a problem student. Her mother actually left the public school system and came and worked for Mama Marva. So I thought that was very interesting and inspiring and great, awesome, right? So anyway, she began to grow, and she went from having 5 students to having a waiting list of over like 300 people who were on the waiting list to get into her school because she was so effective. And of course, she had her critics, because she was doing more with less. You had people in the public school system that saying, "Oh, she's only getting the best of the best." Like, well, y'all need to go in her classroom and see who's actually in there, right? So she began to grow. She began to go out and do lectures and teach teachers how to be more effective. And she was always questioned, she was always criticized, but she said, I'm just going to let my students speak for me. I don't want to let my students speak for me. These children they are getting in, they're testing into the top schools because she was basically preschool through junior high. So most of them had to, find a public school to go to, and most of them were able to get into private and parochial schools. So not all of them went to back to the public school system. But what she did was set a foundation. She set a learning foundation for her students, and most of them went on and became Black excellence. If you watch the 60 Minutes special, you'll see how some of them give her flowers in that interview. So there's so much that we can take from her. And as I said, you know, there are some things that she did that because she did not believe in teaching about blackness, and she just taught them to be, this confident person, not, confidence in their blackness. Now, I we gotta be confident in our blackness. So, you just take the best, you take what you know will work, and you move forward with it. So, um, I encourage you, if you are in education, if you are an educator, and even parents, read this book, because it not only teaches and inspired me how to be more effective as an educator, it also gave me some guidelines as to be more informed and involved as a parent and a grandparent. Marva Collins Way, one of America's most effective educators, demonstrate how parents and teachers can make any child an achiever. And Sister Nikki shared one of our favorite quotes by Mama Marva. She said, "There's a brilliant student locked inside every child, and we have to. If we don't believe in our children, then who? We have to understand that we have so many children who can achieve so many. We become so accustomed to celebrating the exceptions. We fail to realize that most of our children have the ability to do wonderful things. Most of them just have to have that unlocked. Um, so I encourage you. I see Sister Nikki on. Yes, she was a teacher all the time, all the time. Even when she was in her home, if some of the students would get to school early, she would have them sit down at the breakfast table with her and her family, and they would go over things right there at the breakfast table all the time, even with her children. She was a teacher all the time. Peace and power, Sister Beth. Peace and power, Sister Mila. T. Yes. Thank you, T. Thank you, cousin T. And thank you for your continued support. It is appreciated. Yes, Mara, very inspiring. And when she was talking about the parents and getting the parents involved, it reminded me of LaDonna and the work that she's doing in Milwaukee with the students there. you know, I often say it takes a village. We have to stop this blame game. Oh, it's the parents. They ain't doing this and they ain't doing that. There was one thing she said in here about homework. She said she doesn't send homework home until a child has mastered and knows that they could do it successfully. I don't want parents to have to help. Homework is for the benefit of the child, not the parents. And I thought that was interesting because now, we had this whole debate going on about who's supposed to be teaching. And we had to understand that it's a community effort. And don't get it twisted. She had parents who she had to almost beg. She had to create a parents association because there are parents who didn't want to pay the tuition, parents who didn't want to do anything. Oh, you got it. You got it. So, and then she had parents who were supportive as well and helped her raise funds and things of that nature. So we have to remember that we're a community and it takes a village. What's that proverb? It takes a village to raise a child. But there is another part of that proverb, and Baba Kamal reminded me of it, because if that child doesn't get the attention, he'll burn the village down to feel its warmth. And we see that in the behavior problems in the classroom. So, she gave examples of why children are overlooked, why you have children in the back of the classroom who aren't absorbing anything because they're embarrassed, because the teacher has labeled them and they don't even want them. They want them back there, so they won't disturb the learning process. And now, as long as they're quiet and they're not disruptive, that it's a sentiment of they don't care whether they learn anything or not, as long as they're not disrupting the classroom. And so as I read this, it just gave me, it was just encouraging, inspiring to me as we continue to build here at Ashe. Um, Past Saturday, we had an excellent session of Black excellence. We had um, a discussion. People presented what their career fields are and what they do and why they do it and how they do it. And it was a great conversation and demonstration of Black excellence. And we're going to do it quarterly so that our children can see the different types of careers that they can choose from. And so I'll probably be calling on some of y'all. If you have a career or a special skill set that you would like to share with our scholars, please let me know because we need them to see us doing what we do, doing what we do for them. Because we often say the children are our future. Well, we are their present, and we had to make these things happen for them. So, again, the book that talked about tonight, the person that I talked about tonight, it's Marva Collins's Way. If you can, if you can, please check it out because it is phenomenal. Of course, we're going to tweak some things, but we're gonna take the black print that our ancestors left, and apply it. So I do have a couple of announcements to make before I leave you all. The first one is we are currently planning our sixth annual Building Power Summit. And this year is going to be in Senatobia, Mississippi at Kemet Coffee. So if you follow me, you know about Kemet Coffee. You know it's a coffee shop on Main Street in Senatobia, Mississippi, owned by some Frederick and Simone Bean. And it is a space for us. It's another safe space for us besides restoration. Kemet Coffee is a safe space for us. But we're going to be holding this summit next month. Well, actually, like tomorrow is the first. So the 16th through the 18th, we're gonna have some great things on deck. We're gonna have Brother Carlton, Brother Patrick, Sister Mila is going to do an extended wellness session on Saturday morning. We're gonna have Nick Bezel, El Geronimo Pratt, excuse me, Gun Club out of Austin, Texas, join us, and we're gonna have Brother Akil Parker come and speak to us about Kwame Ture. And I'm planning a session on for Ashe Academy. We're gonna have a brainstorming session on how we can expand and grow and reach more children. So that is coming up next month. Also, I want to share with you all the grand opening of Kemet Coffee is going to be this Saturday, y'all, from 7 to 3, I think. Six or seven. I'll have more information, you know, later, probably Friday, about that. But today they had Northwest Mississippi Community College Day, and the faculty, staff, and students, if they patronize, you could buy one, get one for 50% off. And so I went today. You saw my post this morning. I had the Fannie Lou latte. Yeah, it was so good. It was white mocha with made with oat milk and raspberry flavoring. Oh man, when I tell y'all it was good. And then I also had a breakfast croissant with egg and cheese. So I had a great breakfast this morning, and it was very filling. I usually, when I eat early like that, I'm hungry at like 10 o'clock. But this held me until my normal lunchtime at 1 o'clock. So if you're in the Senatobia area, please make plans to come to their grand opening Saturday morning. And so next month I will be back on the last Monday. Uh, that is September. Let me check the date. That will be September 26th. And I have a special guest joining me, Baba Imawala Mubarudi, one of my favorite people. He's going to come and we're going to talk about African Black Center Education. He and his wife, Mama Ya, have had the Akabin Institute in Atlanta, Georgia for over 20 years. So we're going to come, he's going to come and he's going to share with us on the 26th. Now, I'm going to be reading Sesh. This was a book that Mama Ya sent me a couple months ago that Baba Baruti had written, and it is the subtitle is An African Centered Guide for Writing and Self-Publishing for Warriors, Scholars. So I'm going to be just reading this on my own, just because Mama Ya said it, because she thought that it would be great for me to have in my memory bank. But we have an entire section here at Restoration where we have several of Baba Baruti's books. And a particular note is this is one of my favorites, Message to the Warriors. So if you're a warrior, you find this walk frustrating at times. And so Baba Baruti gives great encouraging words to the warriors. And a couple months ago, I actually ordered a few copies to give to some of our warriors here that's involved with what we do. And so he actually even wrote a note to our warriors. So I appreciate him so much for that. And then y'all know this is one of my favorite books, Complementarity. Complementarity. And the name speaks for itself. Thoughts for African warrior couples. And so they just had their complementarity conference a couple months ago, and it was the bomb. So y'all need to link up with Baba Rudy and Mama Ya. And then to educate the people. This was one of the classes I took. Notice how thick it is. But this is one of the classes I took under Barbara Baruti's tutelage, and it was very inspiring, and it was actually a catalyst to get things moving with Ashe Academy. So anyway, I'm gonna be having Baba Baruti on next month, so I'm super excited about him sharing his wisdom with us. And I appreciate you, Brother Bakari, Sister Beth, Sister Nikki, Sister Mila, Brother Demetrius, Brother Ola. I appreciate y'all for tuning in and your support. And if you want to support us financially, the Cash App is running down at the bottom of the screen, $ Oasis L, and that's a lowercase L, because, you know, like Mama Marva, we don't get government funds. We, you know, we want to be able to teach the way we want to teach, what we want to teach, how we want to teach it. So we solicit donations from you all. And it seemed like there was one more thing I wanted to say, but I appreciate y'all so much. We appreciate y'all. Thank y'all. And until next time, y'all have a great evening. Ashe.